Okay, so we're going to look first today at the early empire. So you'll remember that the beginning of history of ancient Rome started as a republic. And then we have Julius Caesar kind of getting power. And then eventually we'll have our first emperor, right? We'll have our first emperor, Augustus, okay? One of the things to understand about the empire is that in the city of Rome, very much like the Agora in ancient Athens, the Forum was kind of the hubbub of ancient Rome. And Smart History has a great article and video, and it's like 13 minutes long. And as someone who has taken time, I studied one summer in Rome, it really does go into it really carefully about how we view it today compared to how people would have viewed it in ancient times, and then like what it looked like in medieval times, and then like excavations and whatnot. So I would suggest that you kind of look at that on your own time if you get a chance. But when we think about the Forum in general, it was located in a very strategic place. And the column of Trajan was placed in this Forum, okay? So many of you have probably seen a little research of this. It was in a valley in between, right, two hills, Capitoline Hill and Palatine Hill. On Capitoline Hill, they had a major temple to, I think it was Jupiter Maximus. It was like the ultimate god for them, right? And that was on the top of Capitoline Hill. Today, there's a beautiful city hall there that was designed by Michelangelo. And so that replaced the ruins of that temple. They call it Campo Dog Nero. And then on the other side was Palatine Hill, and that's where the emperors had their palaces. So this was right smack dab in the middle of the major temple and the residence of the emperor, okay? And so as each emperor gained power and reign, they would build their own temples, their own forum. And the emperors became gods upon their own death. So they not only built their own forum, but they built their own temples so that people could honor them forever and ever. Okay? And so in the Forum, there are monuments to the glory of Rome, but also importantly to its rulers, right? There is temples, right? And it was all about giving this idea of virtue and praise to the rulers, to the emperor, right? And also a little bit of propaganda, right? You know, how great the Romans were over those barbarians, right? The word barbarian is a Roman term. It is a term for people who are not Roman. That's all it means. Is you are not Roman, so you are a barbarian. Okay? So today when you walk in the Forum, you're very low because they've excavated out the sand and the building that had happened in medieval times and the Renaissance times and whatnot. And the best preserved buildings were once upon a time converted into Christian churches. So some of these really nice temples that we have and nice structures, the reason they persisted and were able to stay is because they were then created as churches. Okay, so we have in the Forum of Augustus and the Forum of Julius Caesar. So these forums are relatively small and intimate. The first rulers didn't actually make grandiose buildings. I mean, they were large, but compared to later emperors, they were quite small. So Julius Caesar was kind of like the adopted uncle of the very first emperor, who is Augustus. Okay, and we'll have an image of him today. So we really just have remnants of what that looks like today, but we think it looked like this. So it's very similar to when we go to Washington, D.C. and we walk around all the federal plazas in Chicago and whatnot. You would see Greek style buildings, right? And if you notice, you see that there's these triumphant columns, right? Triumphant columns, which of course the column of Trajan is one. We also have triumphant arches, and we'll look at an example of that, even though there's not one in the 250, right? So the very first image that we have from early empire is Augustus of Primaporta. So it's from Imperial Rome, early 1st century. It's made out of marble. We can watch the video if you want to. How bombarded have we been? Do you guys want to watch the video for this? Yes? Okay. We'll go ahead and watch the video. And so as we're watching for the video, I want you to think about how power is conveyed. That's our theme for today. So how is power conveyed in this image? And then also just be listening too about why were so many images made of this first emperor? You can feel free to take notes on other things as well as they come up. I don't know why it was needed. Okay, so there's a lot to that, right? Go ahead, see if I can get rid of. Get it. Very good. Okay. So does anyone know why so many of these images of the ruler were made? Why would Livia have one? Why would there be a bronze one? It actually didn't even talk about it. I think they updated the video. There were hundreds of images that look just like this, different copies of it. Why? Exactly. They showed the territory of the Roman Empire under Augustus, right? It was very expansive then, right? And then compared to the Parthians. And so when we look at that, he could send these images all around the empire so that people knew what he looked like and would understand the greatness of him, right? Would understand the greatness of him. And so his wife had this very lovely marble version of it at her private residence on the outskirts of Rome. And this was very common. They lived on Palatine Hill, but Rome was busy, it was bustling, it was dirty, it was loud. So it was very common for the rulers to also have a palace on the outskirts of town. And there's some really great ruins that you can visit today if you wanted to go see these different palaces for the different emperors as well. So let's focus on the concept of power, right? How is power conveyed? How is power conveyed? Yeah, Chris.
Something we said in the video was that like it's a direct copy. It's basically a direct like copy almost of the statue of Forest, which is from like the Golden Age of Greece. So the statue kind of represented Augustus bringing like the Golden Age to Rome.
Right. So we have the Golden Age of Greece that represents the Golden Age of Rome, right? We have that youthful athletic body of Dorpheus, right? Because he is kind of this example of what perfection is all about, right? And through perfection, we have power there too, right? He's got that cool, calm, and collected face, doesn't he? Even though his brow is down a little bit, so he seems kind of determined, right? And then his armor that he's wearing, right? The armor has all of these allusions to the conquering of the Parthians and the gods, basically saying, Augustus, you are worthy, right? They're all there like, you are worthy. You have our blessing. You are the first emperor, right? And that's really what it's all saying. Even that little Cupid, which we'll have a little close up of him, is basically saying you are in the lineage of the gods, right? And so they mentioned it in the video, and I want to highlight that realism does not disappear in ancient Rome. We still have realistic images. Obviously, we saw it in the paintings in Pompeii, but we do see ruler imagery changing, right? And so how does the convention of power change from our Parthian, not our Parthian, but our patrician? How does it change? Nicole. Mm-hmm. Right. So instead of age always bringing wisdom, youth, power, calmness is that new convention of power for ruler imagery. Okay. You will still see portrait busts being made during this time. Anytime you go to one of these museums, you will see countless examples of them. Okay. But for the rulers, there is a sense of likeness. Like we know what Augustus looked like. When I go into a museum, I can pinpoint Hadrian and Trajan and Augustus because I have seen so many examples of busts and sculptures of them, all the different museums I've ever been to in my life, right? Because they have a sense of likeness to them and they use it over and over again. So you would see this profile on coins, right? And so we know what they look like, just like we know what, Washington and Lincoln look like, okay? So I think we've covered this enough, right? I think we've covered this enough. So calm, contrapposto, idealized, right? And you can see the many influences. One of the reasons why I showed you the orator is because of that gesture, right? This idea that he's commanding and he's talking to his troops. Because not only is he the emperor, he's also basically the lead commander of the armies. And that was very common for in the empire for them to also lead the troops into war. So he's fully in armor, he's holding a staff, he's raising his hand, he's commanding power, right? And so it would have been painted, and of course, why was anything painted in ancient times? So that you could read the story, right? It made it more clear who those different casts of characters were on the armor, right? So how is the military might expressed? We have a symbol of the dolphin. It also is a symbol of Augustus's great naval victory over Mark Antony and Cleopatra in the Battle of Actium in 31, right? So not only is it a reference to being related to Venus, it also references a victory over Egypt and Mark Antony. We have the military armor, right? With the standard of the Parthenon, the Roman standard being returned from the Parthenon, right? And returning it to home. We have the gods, right? Which they talked about how all these gods basically are saying, Augustus, you were worthy, right? You're worthy of it all. So Cupid is also connected to Julius Caesar. Remember, I said he was kind of like the adopted father / uncle of Augustus. And so it shows that they were all getting their power from the gods. They're not only just related, but they're getting the power. Right? And so there's very specific examples of the gods, and all of these gods and personifications, you know, they're there as political propaganda, right? Augustus, you are worthy. And in a way, they also reference this idea, this concept of Pax Romana. Has anyone heard of Pax Romana before? What does that mean? Pax Romana. Anyone know? Yeah. Peace. Exactly. This was the time of peace and prosperity that came after all that civil war, right? So we had civil war that led to the empire. And so for about 100 years after the reign of Augustus, there was relatively peace and prosperity in ancient Rome. And so this is a time that's often highlighted as this golden age, this early empire. It doesn't mean that they don't expand the empire. It does continue to grow under other future emperors. But this is a time that's often highlighted. So all that God images is kind of referring to that. Okay. So a lot of the video goes over this, but I have it here for you too, so that you can feel free to kind of go through it. But the idea of those healthy babies, that could be like a reference to what? Two little babies could be a reference to, you guys remember, Romulus and Remus, right? But it also could be just a symbol of the prosperity, the health and welfare of the newborn in Rome, right? It could be a symbol of fertility and plenty and greatness and abundance that comes from the new empire. Now, he's walking on sacred ground. How do I know? How do I know he's walking on sacred ground? I have the Palette of Namar here to help us out. Trevor?
Barefoot.
He's barefoot, right? He doesn't have his Roman sandals on. Right? Now, in the city of Rome, there is also the Arakas. This is a very small temple that's located in a flat kind of area around the Tiber. Today it's protected in it's almost like a greenhouse to keep it away from the elements. But this is a really good example of how some of these temples and altars were relatively small at the beginning of the empire. This is not in the 250, but it's very Roman in that it has a central staircase that kind of leads into the inside of it. And then there would be a little altar. Notice that there's like garland swag on the interior of it, right? With animal skulls and then vegetation. The Greeks would have done something very similar to this, right? This was located by a obelisk and a sundial, and it was all representative of how Augustus ruled over all time, right? So almost like the Egyptian concept of the ruler ruling over all time. And so on the different sides of this, there are different images. There is a processional on this that relates to Augustus becoming the emperor. And so there's little portraits of his children and major people of ancient Rome so that we know who these people are, right? And notice it's very similar to like the Augustines. It's like the political elite, right? And so once again, referencing ancient Greece, right? To show their greatness. It's a little bit more realistic though in the portraiture compared to the style of the Greeks, right? Here's an image of that Mother Earth Tulis image again with healthy babies. So this is the kind of thing that was shown over and over again. We have the earth and the seas. We have animals from the sea. We have animals from the earth, all talking about Pax Romana, right? This time of peace and prosperity in the empire. Okay, so that's the end of early empire. Let's go ahead and move on. Okay, we're going to start looking at understanding another major power family, the Flavians, and how power was conveyed through their works, as well as how to keep those Roman people happy. Okay, so go ahead and just take a few moments, and I want you to think about what did the Romans do for their people, right? What public works and construction projects are still around today? Has anyone ever gotten a chance to go to Rome? That one person, right? You probably have seen in history books, thinking about like Europe in general, there's lots of little things that the Romans left that are still around today. Maybe you've been to France or you've seen pictures of France or pictures of in England. Think about the different public works and construction projects that are still around today. And also think about their government. What was it like? And what was it like to be a citizen? So go ahead, just talk amongst yourselves, kind of talk about what you know, and then we're going to watch a video that might help us a little bit more.
And whenever somebody or they charitable acts like they basically do a lot of showing
Okay, we're going to watch a clip from Life of Brian by Monty Python to help us out here. So I'm going to have to stop the recording because I'm sure it's not copyrighted. But Life of Brian basically is a spoof about what it must be like to be the brother of Jesus Christ. That's who Brian is. So give me a second here to pause my resume our recording here, right? So they were able to keep people happy, right? And so there's a lot of things that they were able to build and things that they shared with people under their territory, right? So the roads. when you walk in Rome today, you can still find remnants of those ancient streets. There is also cobblestones from medieval times, but still, especially around the forums, you can see that. Now, we saw illustrations of that at Pompeii, right? Remember those little like speed bumps areas to make sure your cart wasn't going too fast and you run over a person. So those roads, they had grooves for the carts, right? But they also had basically irrigation so that they wouldn't flood. And so they had a very precise way of building them to kind of drain water off. So roads are good, just like our roads, right? Roads are good to move people and things, right? People and things across territories, but they're also great for moving armies. So if you think about our interstate system that we have in the United States, you guys know that that was all built because of the Cold War. That was so we can put planes could land on those roads, right? And we can move armies and people away from major cities in case of nuclear disaster, right? So the Romans did that earlier, right? They built roads so they can move their troops wherever they needed to, okay? As well as for trade, right? The aqueducts that they mentioned, they basically used gravity to create channels that would move fresh water from high elevations to low elevations. A lot of the fountains in Rome today are still supplied by some of these same water sources. Some of these aqueducts were also bridges. So this is actually one in France. This right here is a bridge. You can see people walking across it, and the aqueduct was on the top. And you notice the construction process of the arch, right? Of the arch. Now the Etruscans, right? They also built arches, right? And then the Romans really did it well. And it's actually structurally stronger than typical post and lintel construction, right? It helps distribute the weight. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that later, okay? They create sports gyms and pools. All those baths, right, that you've seen, they had hot rooms, cold rooms, temperate rooms. They had gymnasiums. They had classrooms where you could go learn about like healthy eating or philosophy or debate politics. So just like, you know, Lifetime Fitness, right? They had that in ancient Rome, right? Here is how big they are. This is the baths of Diocletian. And so you can see how enormous some of these structures were, right? Here's some of the baths that we know in England today. They just drained that not too long ago. I think it's got copper at the bottom, why it's all green. But a lot of the interiors have these vaulted ceilings. And this is actually a church in Rome that once upon a time was a bath. So it was converted into a church. And one of the reasons why we still know what the interiors of baths look like. Right? They had shopping malls. So near the column of Trajan, we have the markets of Trajan. And so they had shopping malls. So you can see how they had multi-level spaces to shop. So these different markets. They had protection. So they built barriers and fortifications. Hello. You wrote that? And so they built protection. So this is on the border in Scotland. So this is like the most northern part of the territory. So they would have had soldiers on towers. And I think it was like every 100 feet or something like that. So they still had like a lot, they like brought a lot of prosperity and wealth, but also a lot of people to those distant lands. Sports arenas, right? You want to make people happy, you make things that they can go and like be spectators for. So Circus Maximus was used for horse races, right? This is in Piazza Navona today in ancient Rome. Of course, the Coliseum, which we'll talk about next, okay? So we are at the Coliseum, which in its day was called the Flavian Amphitheater. The Flavian Amphitheater, and that kind of helps us a little bit with our theme. It's in Rome. So this is from about 70 to 80 BCE, or not BC, CE, right? And that helps you to understand something. It was built in 10 years. This is a colossal structure that was built in 10 years. How the heck did they do it? Well, the Romans figured out how to make concrete. And concrete you can set rather quickly, and it's really cheap. And so they were able to build bigger and better because of their inclusion of concrete. Okay, so Vespasian is the patron. He was a Flavian. And so how was it politically and socially shrewd of him to build the Colosseum, right? To build the Colosseum. Does anyone know what was once on the land that the Colosseum now sits? Anyone heard of the crazy emperor Nero, right? Nero caused a massive fire in ancient Rome. He was probably mentally ill, kind of corrupt from power. And what he basically did is on Capitoline Hill, right, where the palaces are, right? He would have underneath of it, right, where this once was, so like at the foot of the hill, there was all this other construction there and housing, and he burned it, right, so that he could then expand his palace. And he actually made a man-made lake in what is now the foot of the Colosseum. So see that little structure there? There would have been a lake inside of it. Kind of like when we looked at Luxor, remember that squared pond that was used for that? So it would be kind of similar to that. And right next to it was a colossal sculpture of Nero. And that's actually where the name Colosseum comes from, is this colossal sculpture that was once there of Nero, right? But in its day, it was known as the Flavian Amphitheater. So basically what they did is that they drained the pond and they built the Colosseum on top of it, right? And so it has a lot of what we call architectural innovation, right? It has 76 numbered entryways. Why is that a big deal? When I go to a concert at the United Center, what do I do with my ticket? What does my ticket tell me? Where I sit. And so when I see my ticket, it normally tells me what gate to enter, right? What section I'm in and what my seat number is. And so they had that down to a science in ancient Rome. So they put numbers on the top of each of these entryways on the first level, right? So that you could walk into it, and we'll talk about the inside of it in just a second, but the different stories of it refers back to Greek order, okay? Even though it's not a temple per se, it has Tuscan order at the bottom, so it has Doric capitals, right? It has Doric capitals. Notice the roundedness. It does have a base. That's why I'm calling it Tuscan, right? Because Doric would not have a base at all, right? So they put that at the bottom. Then above it, it has Ionic columns. At the top of that, it has Corinthian columns. And the fourth story has Corinthian pilasters. So pilasters are like squared columns. So once again, they're referencing the history of temple structure of the Greeks, right, in its decoration, because this is not structural. Those columns don't hold anything up. Notice how they're engaged. They're in the wall. They're really there as decoration. Okay, So what they did is they used a series of barrel and groin vaults. And so the entryways are in arches, and they create barrel hallways that you can walk through. And then you go up a series of ramps so that you can get to your different levels of seating. Right? So when you are inside, you can see remnants of what it once was, but it was basically concrete with stone on the outside. So what the Romans were able to do and how they were able to build so quickly is that they could take wood, right? And they could basically make a mold out of wood and pour the concrete. Once the concrete dried in a few hours, they could take the wood down, set it back up, and do it again, over and over and over again. And then they would just cover it with stone. Normally what we call travertine. Travertine is a stone that's really common in this part of Italy. It's not marble. It's another kind of decorative stone. A lot of the churches have it on the facade of it. Okay. And so the Colosseum has 3 tiers of seating with standing room only at the top. And it also has storage at the bottom. So this is a pretty interesting innovation. So the very bottom arena means sand. It was covered in sand and covered in dirt. And underneath that sand, there's all the storage areas underneath. So that's where you have gladiators, you'd have props, you might have wild animals kept underneath of that just during the use. Those things were, they didn't live in the Colosseum. They were on the outskirts of the Colosseum. Okay, we're gonna stop here today because Central needs to go. And so we'll continue with this tomorrow. And then maybe get a chance to watch a little bit of video about it as well.